All right, welcome to episode 32 of Seize the Moment podcast. Today we have for the third time the great, the powerful Liz Dorval. Welcome.
Hello, good morning.
Hey, welcome back, Liz.
Thank you.
And today we're going to talk about perfectionism. And I guess I want to open with a question. Have you guys ever felt like you need conditions to be perfect before you decide to take action on something?
That's a good question. Liz, you want to take it away?
Conditions in order to be perfect at something?
Yeah,
Yes.
for example, I need to look this way. I need to know this much. I need to have done this before I can do that. I know I'm being general.
No, I love that question. I love it.
Yeah.
Absolutely 110%.
And yeah, I mean, what about you, Leon? You ever have things like that?
Yeah, so for me, it's more, I guess this more pertains to the romantic realm. So, for just kind of for our audience, so a little bit about social anxiety disorder, which I've struggled with for the vast majority of my life. So, a lot of times when people have social anxiety, they think that, and it's connected, there's a high correlation between social anxiety disorder and perfectionism. So, for people who struggle with social anxiety disorder, a lot of times they think that they have to be perfect before they actually kind of go out and maintain or kind of actually develop any sort of friendship or romantic relationship. Mm-hmm. So, for me, the idea was okay, I'm not good enough to date now. So, then, once I become smart enough, once I become sort of muscular enough or toned enough, then I'm going to sort of go out there and try to start dating someone, because before then I'm not good enough.
That's crazy that you say that. I think a lot of people could relate to that.
Mm-hmm.
Not even just saying that or paying lip service. I've definitely felt that way. I was until I lose this much weight, then I'll feel even more comfortable with myself. I mean, by the way, this is even knowing some of the things we already know in psychology. Mm-hmm. For example, if you're already certain, if you're confident, usually people buy into that, and you don't necessarily have to have certain conditions like that met. But even then, I can still relate to you. I've definitely had stuff like that.
And you know what's so interesting for me wasn't even that. So it wasn't so much of I'll be more comfortable, but it was black and white. It's I will be comfortable. It went from literally I'm so uncomfortable now because I don't have any of these things in my mind. But then once I become perfect, right, once I reach this sort of plateau or whatever, this pinnacle, then I'll be able to do all of these things I want. And then people will accept me. And then I'll have love and romance or whatever in my life. Before then, right, it's not possible because I don't have any of these things. So it's like a kind of seesaw. It's either you have them or you don't have them. Liz,
you have to check off all of the boxes before you're even capable to start.
Yep.
Period, yeah. I definitely understand that.
Liz, any examples come up for you?
It was definitely a lot in school where I had to be in all of these extracurricular organizations and I had to get these best grades because if I didn't, then I felt that I was valued a lot less. A lot of it was academic. And when I further, went through school and then I came out into the real world, I felt kind of embarrassed to be in some situations because I felt like I wasn't fit enough. I felt like I didn't have the perfect job and I made the perfect amount of money. And it really kind of wails away at my confidence. So.
Yeah, and that's the downside of perfectionism, at least from the toxic side of it. I mean, actually, we didn't define it yet, right?
Yeah,
I guess we should define.
Let's do that. So, guys, if you ever get a chance, look into this really great article from Vox. It is written by Christy. I'm going to butcher her last name.
Let me see.
Yeah, it's Christy Ashwanden. Christy Ashwanden. So the article is titled "Perfectionism is Killing Us," and so in the article, in defining perfectionism, she wrote, "Perfectionism is a broad personality style characterized by a hypercritical relationship with oneself." So in terms of, so she mentioned an author, I'm not sure what his first name is, but the last name is Hewitt. He wrote a book titled Relational Approach to Conceptualization, Assessment, and Treatment, a lot of clinical stuff. So he wrote, setting high standards and aiming for excellence can be positive traits, but perfectionism is dysfunctional because it's underscored by a person's sense of themselves as permanently flawed or defective. One way they try to correct that is by being perfect. So in terms of pretty much psychology and kind of clinical work, what he's trying to say here is that, and when it comes to perfectionism, it's essentially what's called a coping mechanism. So somewhere kind of in our youth, we decide, or not really decide, it's a bad way of saying it, we learn that our environment is either dysfunctional, that it's obviously and or abusive or neglectful, that we're not pretty much getting our needs met, and we know kind of innately that we have these internal needs and we obviously need to be met by others, especially our parents. So for kids, especially at a very young age, right, somewhere kind of in their childhood, they develop perfectionism as a coping mechanism for that, where they develop the belief that if I'm perfect, mom will love me. If I'm perfect, right, dad will stop beating me, will stop hitting me. If I'm perfect, right, I might even be accepted by my peers, right, social anxiety disorder. So when it comes to perfectionism, what it is, it's a coping mechanism somewhere. And it, by the way, and when I don't want to sort of jump around here,
No, go for
but
it.
when it comes to kind of coping mechanisms, and especially in this case perfectionism, at one point or another, perfectionism was actually a very good coping mechanism in one's life. So a lot of times people think that it's like, there's so much nuance here. So sometimes people think that when it comes to sort of toxic coping mechanisms, that they're toxic all across the board. So like what Alan was saying earlier was that when it comes to perfectionism, right, being perfect all the time is toxic, as opposed to sort of healthy perfectionism when you just strive to be, the best you can be. Or you even strive to be the best every once in a while, understand, or even all the time, but understanding that you can't be the best all the time. So when it comes to those kind of coping mechanisms, that even if, let's say, some of them are toxic, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're always toxic. So when a kid is in a really sort of chaotic environment, and this kind of goes back to Eric Fromm and his sort of understanding of psychology, and that sometimes mental disorders are actually sane, reactions to insane scenarios. So perfectionism, in a way, can be sort of viewed as a normal reaction to a really toxic and chaotic environment. So let's say if a kid is brought up in a really toxic environment where kind of mom or dad doesn't really accept them ever, or even some of the time, where their love is conditional, where it's sort of based on success, where it's based on achievement, where it's even based on beauty, something that you really can't even control. So for them, perfectionism is a really great coping mechanism in the sense that it kind of gets them the thing that they want, right? The thing that they need. So for a kid who struggles with perfectionism, it's because that in that environment, that situation, or rather that style, that coping mechanism, it makes a lot of sense. Because at some point or another, it was reinforced. So let's say let's say you're brought up with what's called conditional regard, right? Conditional love. So, dad or mom or both tell you that, no, your love is pretty much, it's dependent, right? If they give you the implicit message that the only way for you to be loved is if you achieve, if you sort of do these particular things that make you lovable. So in that case, the kid thinks of it as like, oh my God, I have to always do these things. Like, that's what makes me lovable. So sometimes what happens is when he or she brings home a really great grade, it's like, oh, mom is like, I love you. You're like amazing. You're the best son ever. Look at how smart and like phenomenal and sort of curious and intelligent you are. And therefore the kid learns like, oh shit, like, no, I need to be this all the time. The only way for mom or dad to love me is if I maintain this standard all the time. Mm-hmm. So in that particular context, perfectionism makes a ton of sense, even though in sort of other contexts it's definitely toxic and kind of leads to different symptoms, which we'll definitely talk about later. But the point is that in that kind of environment, and by the way, this is not only parental, because sometimes, and guys, stop me please if I'm rambling too much. So if okay, Liz is nodding her head. Okay, I gotcha. So in terms of so it's not only parental in the sense that so sometimes with kids, they're sort of the environment around them, the social context, even if their parents are really really good parents, that what happens is sometimes that the kind of kids around them either bully them or sort of exclude them, etc., and they learn in the social environment that they have to be perfect. So it's very complex, right? That's it.
No, 100%. For example,
and also
mm-hmm.
when you get older, and let's say you fall into a toxic codependent relationship, mm-hmm. and it's abusive, and you feel like you have to reach this certain point to get peace and happiness with your partner, because there's a lot of maybe criticism involved.
Mm-hmm. Oh, like meeting a certain standard, and then if you don't meet that standard, it's like it gets really toxic.
That's correct.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Been there. Yep, for sure.
Well,
yeah.
Would you be okay talking about it?
Yeah. Okay. Whatchamacallit? No, it's really hard to remember actually, because it's hard to cite an example. I've definitely had that before, where, for example, like if you don't say the right thing, it's gonna get really bad, but you kind of maintain this like comfort zone of where you're still in that codependent thing. And anytime the times it gets really toxic is when like these expectations are not being met. I guess let's say it's as an example, this isn't mine exactly, but let's say it's something like having to do with jealousy. Let's say the guy and let's say it's a man and a woman, and the man is someone who's very jealous. So anytime the girl is not always validating him, he thinks that her mind is elsewhere. So he needs to constantly be validated. Anytime he's not validated, he's gonna think she's cheating or something. Or
stop loving him.
Or stop loving him or something like that. That one was very general. I'll try to see if I can remember something later. But for example, to go back to what you were saying before, when let's say the child who's performing, let's say in school, and doesn't get the good grade, that expectation of themselves to be able to meet the standard that is set out for them, either by society, their parents, or themselves, they end up spiraling they start to feel really bad if they don't meet that standard. And that can hinder their success. And then the next action that they would take could even be affected by that initial reaction. And then it just kind of becomes all sort of interconnected and can have consequence, like cascading consequences along the way. I'll give you an example, sort of related. So for me, back in the day, I had started this page, Ego Ends Now. Leon's familiar with it. And I was thinking, when I first made it, it was great. You're sharing memes, you're sharing inspirational things, you're trying to write out paragraphs, certain things you want to share with people. Then there's a certain point where you have to do kind of what we're doing now, where you have to create, maybe, like if you really want to impact people, some kind of video content or your own content. I didn't feel like I kept thinking, before I can make any video content, I have to become more qualified. And how do I become more qualified? I have to acquire more knowledge. And then every time I would acquire more knowledge, I would think, oh, okay, I'm ready to do this. But then I wouldn't. So that's another factor in there that's concerning why I didn't. But I keep thinking, like, I need to meet these certain standards. I need to look this way. I need to behave that way. I need to speak in this sort of way in order to be compelling enough for, to do what it is that I wanted to do. But then every time I thought like that, that kept me from taking any action at all. And the thing is, you have to, even if you have that trait in you, that perfectionism, I realized this from my own personal experience. This might sound very cliche or obvious to the audience, maybe, or to you guys too. But like, you have to try something and fail at it, or try something and make mistakes and not be perfect in order to gain experience, so that this way you can become better at that thing. A lot of the, like for example in my case, with the theorizing and thinking I need to have more knowledge and this and that, that's fantastic from a theory perspective. Yeah, I have all this knowledge, but if I'm not applying it or trying to use it, it doesn't work. And also, any knowledge that I acquired that I wasn't then putting into practice, I'd forget anyway. So it became useless, essentially.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And Liz, does perfectionism ever affect you professionally?
Yes. When I was thinking when Alen was speaking about what he's describing is closely related to imposter syndrome. And I struggle with that a lot. I was promoted earlier this year to a position that I felt like I really didn't know much about to succeed. And for a while, I was very uncomfortable because I felt like I didn't belong there and other people thought that I didn't belong there. And the way I kind of got over that was thinking they thought I was capable. That's why I'm here. And I just have to be stubborn and just try to write it out as best as I can. And, now like 6 months later, I've definitely gotten more comfortable.
And so I'm
wondering...
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
No,
I was just like, yes.
So I was going to ask, in terms of feeling like an imposter in that position, do you feel like that was based on prior evidence, or was it sort of based on the way you thought of yourself?
That's a really tough question.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it is self-imposed,
Mm-hmm.
I have to say. I remember when that position opened up, I did decide to just kind of dive in and go to my boss's office and ask for it and pitch my case about
Nice.
how I'm not, like, other people might be more experienced if you hire outside, but I think that I'm clever enough to quickly get it. And thankfully, she agreed. But then when I got into the position, we actually hired this like efficiency expert to come in, and she had to interview all of us. And she mentioned to my supervisor, like Liz might be too green for this position, and that really kind of like stung, like right here. And I was like, oh no, like what if my boss is just like, oh yeah, maybe this efficiency expert's right. Like maybe I'm not in like this position. But then I was like, no, I'll be fine. Like, yeah, I'm green, but I just gotta really keep trying my best. Don't get the yips. And like, so yeah, it was a little from column A, a little from column B. But the only way I was gonna get experience was just by trying it.
And what helped you become more comfortable?
Time. It was just time.
Yeah. I'm assuming you've gotten pretty good feedback so far?
I have, and I was actually approached earlier this week to lead a new project, something I'm really excited about. And when I was approached by my boss, I felt like, oh, wow, like, I think I'm okay now. I think I'm feeling a little bit better about this now. So.
That's so awesome. You became desensitized to it.
Yeah, I have. Yeah. Sometimes, like in that situation, when you're dealing with imposter syndrome, there's nothing really too complex that you need to look for in order for it to dissipate. It's just practice and time, just like anything else.
Yeah, and what's interesting is imagine a scenario where because of that imposter syndrome or perfectionism, say you didn't even approach your boss in the first place for that management position, that there could be a scenario where that would occur for another person, let's say. So the fact that you decide to do it anyway, even though it's scary, even though it seems like, well, I don't want to make it so dramatic, like the odds are insurmountable.
Liz was Sisyphus. Wow, Liz, that's amazing.
But like, yeah, it's supposed to feel that way. It's supposed to feel uncomfortable when you're doing something that's very new. Yeah. So, and we've talked about that before. But essentially, the idea is you have to act anyway. You have to just try. Yep. And being stopped by these, like I was stopped for years. If anyone has a cautionary tale, because imagine how much work you could get done if you were really diligent for 3 years and you're really dedicated. So imagine you lost 3 years of time. Yeah. I don't even think it was 3. I think it was more. So let that be a cautionary. So right now we're doing what we're doing, and it's fantastic. And also, I mean, just for the record, if it wasn't for you, this podcast would not have happened.
Well, we made it both happen.
We made it both happen. Fair enough. It is okay. You're right. But the initial thing. Yeah. Okay. Fine. So fine. It's us. But I'll say this. That having someone who's being in a team also actually really helps you to kind of execute on things. Yeah. Because it kind of holds you accountable, and there's more of a like an anchor to you wanting to like take the action, as opposed to when you place the anchor on yourself. Yeah. So this is not like a one-size-fits-all answer, but if anyone is struggling to do something, let's say they have some kind of idea they're trying to execute on, or a business, you can't do it alone anyway.
Yeah, and by the way, the worst podcast...
Possibly, potentially.
No, I mean you can. It would just be much harder, and I think the quality would be reduced.
I just wanted to say, just in case there is a case where somebody did it by themselves. I think there are probably, but most of the time you can't do a lot of things like that on your own.
Mm-hmm. And you know, like the worst podcasts, at least in my opinions, are the ones where there's like one white dude and he's just shouting into a microphone, like the Ben Shapiro shit. I don't know if you guys ever seen his show. Oh my god, it's so awful, man. I'm like, how does anybody actually, like him, Alex Jones, like all of these different people, right, who pretty much just like sit in front of a microphone and just go on these rants. So I don't know if you guys...
I respect the ability to do that, because I don't know how you maintain a because here's the thing, you're not... Unless the person behind the camera is who you think you're talking to, and that's the trick, and that's how you're talking to the whole audience, I don't know how you are setting up a whole... rant monologue with that level of concentration.
Oh, I could answer that. They're narcissistic. They just think people should sit there and listen to them talk because they're so brilliant.
It's
just like a really long stream of consciousness.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. So, I mean, like, if you're writing a book, I get it. You know, that's a little bit different. But I think if you're just ranting into a microphone for 2 hours, there's something wrong. This is my opinion.
I'm just saying, you're talking about our future guests, Alex Jones and Ben Shapiro right now, and I'm trying to be really respectful.
I don't know if you guys ever watched the Alex Jones show, but he cuts off all of his guests. It's like really hard to listen to. So like they'll talk, and then like midway through, he'll just like rant and just cut them off. It's awful.
I'm not bragging, but yeah.
I did really enjoy his expose on Bohemian Grove.
Yeah, that was excellent though. I gotta give it to him on that one. That was pretty amazing. But what did we like really learn though? I mean, it sounded like for the have you ever seen it? Secrets of Bohemian Grove?
No.
Oh my god.
I've really mainly seen him on Rogan's podcast, and then just briefly while just seeing what he's about on YouTube, I've scrolled around, and I've seen him go on those rants or monologues. And with like really good, I'll say this, as far as being compelling and having like a high energy, he's really good at that, just based on that. I'm not talking about his content, what he's saying, but just that is good.
Yeah. He's just a force for evil, that's all.
Hey, man. Hey, man. I don't know.
All right. So just to kind of shift gears a bit, so I also wanted to define another portion of perfectionism for our audience, again, going back to the article. So the author writes, perfectionism comes in 3 common flavors. Self-oriented, where someone demands perfection from themselves. Other-oriented, where they demand perfection from others around them, like spouses, coworkers, and friends. And socially prescribed perfectionism, where the person feels external pressure from the larger world and society to be perfect. So I wanted to ask you guys, which forms of perfectionism do you feel like are most common or most, I guess, prevalent in your lives? Liz, you first.
Oh boy. I'm gonna go with self-oriented now. In the past, it was definitely socially prescribed, but definitely so self-oriented.
And what do you feel like some of your standards or expectations for yourself are?
Well, I used to try to write out this really detailed to-do schedule list that I would try to hit every day. And it would involve like, I would get up at 5:30 in the morning and I would exercise, and then I would do language learning and, eat a healthy breakfast and prepare all my meals and drink like 2 cups of water. And then I would go to work and I would have to be like perfect and on the ball and like have all of the good ideas in the meeting. And, toward the end of the day when I would tick off everything, I'm just like, oh, wow, like I didn't hit all of these bullet points. I'm lazy.
Wow, yeah. Very black and white.
Yeah.
Alan, what about you?
Surprise, surprise, the gym
is
coming into this again.
Oh, yes. Wait, you go to the gym?
Yeah. It's a common theme on the show. No, so the thing is, when I would first be going to the gym, if I didn't go that day, or if I told myself I'm gonna eat properly today, say I even got the whole gym thing down, if I didn't eat properly that day, I would then think like, wow, you really, I didn't really verbalize this in my head, but the idea is, I would say, wow, you have like no self-control,
Black and white.
Yeah, and then I would like really kind of, it's not that I would beat myself up, but I wouldn't feel good, and it's like felt like when I objectively thought of it, it was a stupid reason not to feel good, because then that not feeling good spiraled and then affected my next action. And then also the people I'd interact with. It's kind of lowered my state, if you will.
Your vibe.
My vibe, let's say, right?
Your flow.
Yes.
My flow. Exactly. So, if I came to somebody...
Throwback to episode 1.
Holla!
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so if I did that, it would affect how I'm talking to people, too. And, like, I didn't want to do that. I'm just trying to, like, accomplish some goal, and then all of a sudden, it's, like, making me go down every time I'm not reaching, like, a certain standard.
Yeah.
Then, of course, I then thought about it a different way, where I thought, okay, like, did I go to the gym today? Did I do this today? Do that? It's like these little wins that I would then start counting, even if there's like one thing I didn't particularly do, and I kind of just try to weigh it and be like, okay, well, you didn't do this, but you did this, or maybe like, okay, you didn't do it today, but maybe you'll do it tomorrow, and try to do it tomorrow, but don't beat yourself up because any more thinking about it is useless. It's going to affect your next action and all this stuff, and also I'm monopolizing my mental resources on that instead of like something useful. So there's a lot of little things like that.
So it's like as Meatloaf said, 2 out of 3 ain't bad.
Yeah, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. Yeah, so also there's that, and then back to the example about the whole so I had the thing with the social implications as far as perfectionism goes. Yeah, I felt like society wouldn't accept me doing any kind of videos unless I sounded like unless there was a certain level of articulation or something compelling about what I'm saying. So yeah, but then if I didn't practice, there's no way to build up that skill. So right.
Yeah, and so for me, it's pretty much the self-oriented one, where, so again, kind of going back to black and white thinking. So interestingly enough, I don't know how much you guys know about Oliver Sacks, the neurologist who died, I think it was like 2-3 years ago.
I know the name.
Yeah, so he oh my god, such an interesting dude. So for him, he was a really good-looking guy when he was younger. Obviously, it was, with age. Yeah, whatever. So the point is that he was like a really good looking guy, and he was really smart, and he was like obsessed with working out in the gym. And so one of his things was that, I guess one of his like major points about sort of working out and bodybuilding, and he was actually a really good bodybuilder, like he was in great shape. And he's like, it actually never made me feel good about myself. He's like, no matter how hard I try, no matter how much muscle I build, it actually did nothing for my self-esteem. So I'm assuming the idea with him was that he kept going thinking that it was going to make him feel like good about himself, maybe even feel perfect. And so that kind of reminded me, and just before I go into sort of my life, that reminded me, remember guys, I told you that John Candy quote, if you're not enough without a gold medal, you'll never be enough with one. So when it came to my life and it came to sort of working out and going to the gym, since you mentioned it, I'm like, whatever, now I'm going to talk about it too. So when it comes to the gym, I felt like, I don't know if I believe this now so much anymore, although I'm pretty sure I do, and I'm just not being honest with myself because this is the show, that I really thought that even though despite that I started working out and I got into better shape, that it actually never sort of compensated for my flaws. So initially my thinking was like, no matter what, or rather not no matter what, my thinking was that if I kind of worked out hard enough, or if I sort of developed a particular figure or physique, that eventually like the flaws won't be that obvious or whatever, that prominent. But somewhere down the line, a couple of years later, after I was obsessively working out, I don't do so much of that anymore, but after I was like obsessively working out and I kind of got into, I guess, almost close to the shape that I wanted to be, it was like the flaws in my mind were still pretty prominent. And I was like, shit, man, no matter what I do, it's never going to make this go away. It's like I could sort of compensate in all of these other areas, whether with intelligence, sort of being articulate, right, with working out, but it's like it never actually eliminates any of these things. So for me, I was like, what is even like the point of it? And there was a point in my life where I really got down about it, where I figured like, why even bother? Like, it's never going to make any of these things disappear. So, this doesn't even have a happy ending. I don't know, that's kind of where I'm still at. Where I'm like, I'm still doing all of these things, but I'm like, I don't really even know why. So I guess in my mind, perfection is still the goal. So even if I deny it and I could tell you sort of rationally that, yeah, obviously I get it, it's stupid, it's never going to happen. But somewhere in the back of my mind, every time I go to the gym, I'm like, oh my God, why am I doing this? So it's not going to really do much for me.
Just for fun, I know this is a perfectionism episode, but like, I was actually talking to a friend earlier about this today too. She was talking about going back to like working out, not necessarily going to the gym, but just working out. And she was talking about her reasons for doing it. And she was saying like, yeah, I this is not a joke, but it's gonna sound like it. Like, oh, I was just working out before just because I didn't want to die, right?
Well, that's
I was like, okay, that makes sense. Sure,
survival is
sure.
a good reason.
But she's like really young, right?
Yeah.
And like technically, that kind of reason or that purpose isn't so compelling, which is why she's talking about it. Oh, and I didn't mention this. She was saying she's having like issues with actually executing on doing some of these things that she wants to do. And I think it's because you need to have a compelling reason or a compelling purpose. So, like so that was very interesting because when I told her that, she started thinking like about that. And I said, just for fun, a little bit later, write down what it is you really want to do, maybe later in life, doesn't have to necessarily be now, and what are all the little things you have to do to accomplish that. So, and then as for fun, I tried to frame like her working out, not necessarily just to avoid death, but what if, for example, when you work out, you feel less stressed, you had some kind of release, right? Yeah, I hit the mic. Anyway, so you have some kind of release, and then because of that release, there's less stress, and because of less stress, whatever situation you go into, you'll bring in a better quality of energy. And then perhaps when you're trying to accomplish that bigger thing that you're trying to do, that's one of the little things that actually contributes to that bigger goal. And then you view that little thing in a new light, and then you actually are more compelled to do it. So that was just to kind of try to steer that in a happy.
What do you think she's going to do?
I think she's gonna definitely think about it. I also sent her Alan Watts video about the what if money was no object.
I gotcha.
Like what's like she really want to do, that kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you can say something and they'll listen to you. Your friend's gonna listen to you. You're your friend, right? But then at the same time, sometimes you want to give them some kind of exemplary role model who said something like really epic or profound. Yeah. And then they're like, whoa, yes, I can really get with that. And then they resonate with them, and then they actually listen and do the thing. Right. Yeah.
And so I wanted to ask both of you guys. So I guess at this point, I mean, obviously nobody, I think, neither one of us three has kind of found, a method to completely overcome this. But I wonder for both you, Liz and Alan, what's helped you guys overcome perfectionism to the extent that you have? Like, what sort of strategies do you use for yourself when you feel like, I need to be perfect?
Do you want Liz to go first? Or
it's up to you. Liz, what do you prefer? You or Alan?
Alan, you go first.
Okay.
So, for me, I try to think of. I like to do this thing where I think of multiple perspectives anytime I can take into consideration. Like, say I have like a thought, like something related to perfectionism. This is it's getting really general. Okay, so say for example, I want to go to let's say the gym, right? And but you know what? Actually, I already went like several days during the week. Maybe there's something else I'd like to accomplish. So I would say, you know what? I could not go today, right? Yeah. But the thing is, when I have that thought, the intrusive thought that comes in immediately is, no, go to the gym, right? To keep that perfect thing going where you're going, you could probably make time for this other thing, all that. Yep. When that comes in, something like that, I'll take into consideration a whole bunch of like floating possibilities, like different perspectives that I can think about it. I think of one where what happens if I do go? Oh, it would actually be good. Maybe I'd feel better after I did it, and maybe it won't take as long as I really think it's going to take. All that. That's one perspective. Another is, hey man, you went the whole week already. You know what? Let your body rest anyway. Maybe you can think about it from a different perspective. Like, you should just rest, right? Then another perspective where it's like, there's this other thing you should be doing. All that. Long story short, though, in general, I try to think of multiple different perspectives anytime I have that urge to feel like I'm not doing what I should be doing in order to fully get a grasp on the situation. Because maybe that first impression I have is not correct. I always think that the first one is not always correct right away.
So you kind of have like a Socratic dialogue with yourself.
Pretty much.
That's cool.
But sometimes it's also, it works in two ways for me. one way I'll actually step back and think about it if I'm like, let's say at home, I'm considering something. But sometimes I could do it in a snap, like sort of judgment as well. This actually doesn't take that much time. I'll immediately encounter that intrusive perfectionist thought, let's say, and then immediately think that can't be right. There's a million different perspectives I can take on this without even taking those perspectives. And then instantly it shuts down the intrusiveness of that thought.
That's really cool. Wow. It's a good method. Liz, how about you?
Well, I try to remind myself that the grief and the stress that I experience by not being perfect is self-imposed. And I don't expect others to be inauthentic with their perfectionism. And so I try to extend that same kind of courtesy to myself when things get overwhelming and I'm down on myself and hard on myself.
And what's
I'm sorry?
No, I was going to ask, what's some of the self-talk that you use?
You did the best that you could today, and you'll get more experience, and you'll do more things tomorrow. It's a very Rome wasn't built in a day kind of mentality, and I don't expect the world from other people. And I know that everyone has their flaws and their quirks and their mistakes, and everyone essentially just tries the best they can with what's given to them. And I'm thinking, if I can give that pass to other people, what makes me so different that I can't give it to myself?
Oh, I love that. Very impactful.
That's like a mic drop statement.
Yes, self-empathy. And you know what I also find to be really helpful, because I love philosophy, and I just obviously love kind of thought experiments. I actually, pretty much when my clients struggle with perfectionism, I go through the thought experiment of, you know what, let's imagine life if you were perfect. And sort of they kind of first imagine themselves as being perfect with others. I'm like, no. You're perfect. Nobody else is perfect around you. What happens? What happens in life? Let's say you have all of the things you want. You're the most beautiful person. You have the perfect height, the perfect weight. You're the smartest person in the world. One of the most, if not the most successful. Let's say I'll even throw in compassion, even though technically being perfect in terms of physical appearance or any kind of exterior qualities isn't linked to compassion, at least for the most part. I'm like, whatever, we'll even throw that in there.
You're perfect inner and out.
Yeah. I'm like, let's say you have it all, right? What would your life be like? And most of the time, if not all of the time, they realize holy shit, life is terrible that way. I'm like, yes, exactly. So they kind of go through it and they realize that people don't want to be around them because they're pretty much jealous, and obviously that's kind of what it is to be a human being. It's a part of it. They're envious of them, and then on top of that, they're intimidated by them. So it's for people, and this goes back to Meg's research on relationships. Meg Van Dusen, who was a guest of ours a few weeks ago. So she pretty much said that kind of intimacy and authenticity in relationships are the things that make us happy. So you'd be missing that if you were perfect. Not many people are going to open up to you and share their flaws with you if they think that you're perfect. If they even are willing to be in any sort of relationship with you, it's only because you can do something for them, and in a way that's not going to be... and it's going to be sort of, I guess, non-expressive, for lack of a better term, where they're going to sort of hide their flaws from you because they're not going to want to feel, or they're not going to want you to judge them. And even, let's say, if you are super compassionate, and if you're, let's say, known to be incredibly empathic, again, even though it's very unlikely if you're perfect, the chances are that the other person is not going to really see it that way. That even if, let's say, hypothetically, they don't think that you're going to judge them, they're still going to feel insecure and inferior to you, knowing that sort of inside and outside you're perfect. And they're not going to want to expose that because they're not going to want to admit that to themselves. So a lot of times when we think of perfection, it's sort of like when we think of immortality. We think that we want immortality without actually thinking of what that entails. So it's a lot of the times we sort of go on through life avoiding death because we're like, no, I want to live forever. But if you were to actually ask somebody to sit down and think about what living forever entails, 9 times out of 10, I don't think they'd want to. And I think it's the same thing with being perfect. I don't think we'd actually want it if we knew what it meant.
Yeah, there's something very beautiful about being imperfect. There's this concept in Japanese called wabi-sabi, and it's like when like a bowl chips or cracks, and there's something beautiful in those kind of imperfections in the object, and that can extend toward other people as well. And that number one word is authenticity.
That's really cool. I really like that concept.
Also, perfection has a sort of this tinge of finality to it, and that's not like who we are.
That's
we're
true.
it's like we're verbs. We're these things that are in constant action, constant change, and perfection doesn't imply that. Perfection implies some sort of a final result. In a way, I tend to think of it that way, at least. I don't know how you think about it.
No, I love that. Yeah. So you're pretty much saying that we are a process of development.
Yeah, and then to adhere to any sort of notion of perfection, like if it's done in a healthy way, like you're taking a bow and arrow and you're shooting towards perfection, and you're trying to just kind of up your game in many different ways, so to speak. That's respectable. That's fine. But in general, the toxic version of it, of trying to adhere to perfection, it's not naturally who we are. It feels like it's almost like a mental trick, a trick of the mind, so to speak.
Yeah. And so according to the author, since I want to kind of piggyback on that, she wrote, striving for perfection isn't the same as being competitive or aiming for excellence, which can be healthy things. What makes perfectionism toxic is that you're holding yourself to an impossible standard that can never be achieved, essentially setting yourself up for perpetual failure. So pretty much what I think you were saying was that it's okay to sort of aim for that, but to accept that you're not going to always experience it. That you might be the best sometimes, you're not going to be the best all the time. You might, let's say, get an A, or let's say if you're looking for an A plus or the perfect score on an exam, you're going to probably get it some of the time, absolutely, especially if you're a hard worker and you're smart. So, but the point is that you're not going to get that all the time. So I think that a lot of times what happens with perfectionism is people don't take into consideration their circumstances. So it's like, here I am as pure free will, and if I just want something bad enough, I'm supposed to be able to get it. Or if I'm smart enough, I'm supposed to be able to get it. Or if I'm beautiful enough, I'm supposed to be able to get it. So like an example that comes to mind is like, let's say somebody says to themselves, well, here I'm taking this class. And so let's say I got an A in the class, but I'm actually still unhappy with it. And so maybe the professor would ask why. And so the student might say, well, because you know what, it took me a really long time to sort of understand the concepts and the material. And, I didn't grasp it as like quickly and as, fully as I wanted to. And the professor says, yeah, but like, you did really well. And you were like, sort of in terms of your grade, you were one of the highest performing students. And so the student says, yeah, but you know what, if I was really smart, like if I was really, really smart, right? Not like this sort of facade of intelligence. If I was really smart, I would have understood all of those concepts quickly. It would have just sort of clicked, right? So a lot of times when we're sort of thinking or we're in that state of perfectionism, we don't really take into consideration the circumstances, or as sort of the existentialists would say, the facticities of our lives. So what it means to be a human being is, so there are very few people, first of all, and let me not say that, this was wrong. So it depends, first of all, on the field that you're in, and there are very few people, even as experts in the field, who are able just to grasp all of the sort of complex concepts quickly. Right, so even like me, let's say as a therapist, I struggle reading the material. There's a psychologist named Otto Kernberg. I can't fucking understand that dude, and I do this for a living. I am a quote unquote expert in this field. And so the thing is, sometimes we set ourselves to the standard of, if I'm actually smart, then I'm supposed to grasp everything that sort of I'm, kind of an expert in quickly. And it doesn't really work that way, because the thing is, there's so many confounding variables. First of all, it takes a long time for us in terms of what our brains are like, even if you have a high IQ, to understand complexity. It depends on the sort of articulateness, that's even a word, and how articulate essentially the author is in terms of the material that you're reading, how clear they are in their writing. So it depends on pretty much the other like variables in your life, right? Like how stressed are you, how depressed are you, how many classes are you taking that semester, right? How tired are you the majority of the time? So sometimes people think there's this one-to-one correlation between IQ and sort of quickly grasping material that you're learning, and it's not that simple. And so a lot of times what I find is that this was essentially the case for me. I mentioned this before, that I was like super judgmental once upon a time with people, and it was because I was seeing things very simplistically. From my mind, it was like, yeah, like why can't you just do that thing? I don't get it. It's so easy. But it's like, if you took it from the other person's perspective, they're like, no, but I have like all of these other things going on. And the reason why I wasn't able to do that is because, like, let's say I'm in a depressive episode, like work is really stressful, I've been really tired, etc. So the idea is, a lot of times when we're not empathic to ourselves or for other people, it's because we're also looking for simple answers. It's like we're saying to ourselves that if this is really true, it's like, oh, that idea of love, right? If this person really loves me, then they'll just fight through all of their psychological issues to sort of get me, right? It's like that Joe Rogan and Nikki Glaser episode where pretty much Nikki Glaser's like, yeah, like these guys broke up with me because like they told me they were afraid of being vulnerable. And Joe Rogan, kind of from this sort of idealistic mindset, was like, oh no, that's probably bullshit. He's like, if they really loved you, they would have fought for you. And I'm like, dude, like you're such a smart guy. Like that's your interpretation. Like no, it doesn't work that way. Somebody who struggles with vulnerability can't just automatically fight for somebody because they're in love with them. You can be both. It's not that black and white. It's like you can be in love with someone, and because you're afraid of being rejected, you're afraid of sort of putting yourself out there and not being kind of like, let's say, seen or accepted, for lack of a better term, for who you are. That it could be that a person is in love with you, but is really terrified of being in that state with you in that place. So the idea is that we really have to accept that things aren't so black and white, that we don't have these simple answers to really sort of complex scenarios and really sort of nuanced scenarios. So just really quickly going back to that idea of like, if I'm really smart, right, that means I should have grasped this material quickly. Most of the time, no matter where you are an expert in, that it's depending again on the complexity of the material, even experts in particular fields don't necessarily grasp the material they're reading quickly, right? That's why I mentioned like my situation with reading Otto Kernberg. Like I understand like the terms that he uses, but for me he's an incredibly difficult writer. And it could be a combination. It could be that A, he's not clear because he tries to be overly complex, and then B, my mind just can't fully grasp what he's saying. And that's cool. But the point is that it's not as simple as, oh, if I were smart, I would have understood him. I guess I'm an idiot.
Yeah. I mean, it could be just a matter of resonating with his style of writing, right? It could be as simple as something like that. Potentially, no. You got to leave room for other explanations, but just considering that, it could be that you interpreted another piece of writing that someone else thinks is incredibly difficult, but you interpreted it very well.
That's true.
So there's that possibility too.
Yeah. Yeah. Liz, what do you think?
When you mentioned not everything is black and white, I'm really glad you said that. I think one thing that we all have to be mindful of is that every single thing is a shade of gray. And with that knowledge, we can be a lot more compassionate to ourselves and to other people, and to just give everyone in general like a lot more slack with what we're trying to do and our own vulnerabilities and our own struggles. And this kind of message really needs to be repeated, because now we're going through this kind of perfectionism epidemic, I guess I can call it.
I'm glad you said that.
Because like there have been studies that said like since the 80s, this need in perfectionism has skyrocketed, and it's really hitting millennials, it's hitting Gen Z. And now you're having these record numbers of anxiety and depression disorders from these young people who think that they're not good enough and things aren't going to improve unless they hit this impossibly high standard. And I was also reading that they somehow also connected this idea of perfectionism to the opioid crisis, and how people are just like, oh, like this hurts, or I'm getting older and this hurts and that hurts, and I need medication to make myself feel better and perfect again. And then you have a lot of these people like getting addicted in this kind of pursuit of feeling like they once did.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of these doctors are enabling it. And, young people have to understand that, no, you can't achieve everything 100%. You just have to try your best. And then, older people who want this medication to feel better have to understand that getting older is a part of life.
Yes.
And you're not going to feel the same way as you did in your 20s. And you won't be able to, rake the whole yard in an hour like you used to, but that's okay.
Yep, absolutely. And then, so just to piggyback off of what you said, this is something that we wanted to focus on too, the actual research on perfectionism. So in this article she writes, Kern and his colleague Andrew Hill gathered data from more than 40,000 college students who had taken a psychological measure of perfectionism between 1989 and 2016. In 1989, about 9% of respondents posted high scores in socially prescribed perfectionism, but by the end of that study, they had doubled to about 18%. On average, she says, young people are more perfectionistic than they used used to be. And the belief that other people expect you to be perfect has increased the most. So she writes, the rise in perfectionism is especially troubling because it has been linked to an array of mental health issues. A meta-analysis of the 284 studies found that high levels of perfectionism were correlated with depression, anxiety, eating disorders, deliberate self-harm, obsessive-compulsive disorder. So the constant stress of striving to be perfect can also leave people fatigued, stressed, and suffering from headaches and insomnia. Crazy stuff, man. Just really, really wild statistics.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's increased.
Mm-hmm.
And most likely, due to social media.
Yeah.
Most likely, And then you have all these idols or people who are models of perfection.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that we're more on our phones than, well, that's a fairly new thing, but the fact that we're on our phones a lot of the time, I mean, and we're interacting less, and then kind of, this is the things that we're looking at and trying to adhere to, you could see how that's kind of a glaring issue.
Yeah.
That needs to be addressed.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, the way I kind of, and obviously I want to hear what you guys think too, the way I kind of view social media is, I mean, I guess, no, that's, I was going to say with celebrities, maybe not for them, but I think for everybody, I think we all feel this pressure to sort of put our best selves forward in terms of social media. So it's really, really hard to sort of, first of all, I'm against shaming anybody for trying to look perfect on social media because I get it. They don't want to be left out and they want to feel like they're kind of along with everybody else. And the thing is, like, when it comes to social media, and this is something that we talked about, I think it was 2 weeks ago with Meg, where I talked about that client of mine who was a trendsetter. And so, like, for this kid, like, it's so amazing because he's super unique and he kind of puts himself out there where it's like, on the one hand, he's afraid of being judged and he's afraid of being rejected. But then on the other hand, he's like, you know what, it's actually more important for me to be myself. And so what was so cool about him is when he was in college, well, he still is in college, but like when he first started, well, actually when he was in high school, so there were people who came out and said to him, they're like, you know what, because you were able to be who you were, I was able to come out as transgender, or I was able to come out as gay. And so because for them, they felt like, here's this kid who's sort of leading the way, and if it's okay for him, then that means it must be okay for us. So as difficult as it is for us to kind of, I guess, come over or sort of, let's say, cross that boundary, I think it's really necessary for us, especially obviously in doing this podcast, which I'm so happy that we are doing, is that we have to have more people who are putting themselves out there authentically, and to say that, like, look, we should really reward these people because it's really, really fucking hard to do that. So, like, with that kid, I was incredibly proud of him. I was like, that's so amazing that you were able to do that. Because he was like, on the one hand, I'm so afraid of rejection, but then it's not enough for me to sort of stifle my inner sort of, I guess, my inner self, my real self, who he was authentically. And so I think for a lot of us, that little by little, step by step, that sort of more people need to become leaders in this way, where they would sort of put more of, I guess, their, I don't know, I guess, what's the term? I don't want to say indecent, but more of their, like, I guess, flaws out on display, and to say that it's okay for me to be this way and it's okay for you to be this way. It's like, and this, and I think this is based on the sort of, I guess, an axiom that we have in therapy, which says that self-disclosure begets self-disclosure. Pretty much meaning that whenever you express or whenever you expose your flaws and vulnerabilities, other people are able to do the same because it's like, oh shit, wow, like, you're flawed and I'm flawed and we can be flawed together.
Yeah, it's like you're giving permission.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and social media is like the toughest one, man, because like that one is, it's like its own sort of monster. It's incredibly hard to change.
I don't think we're mentally evolved enough to kind of handle what social media has handed us.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if I mentioned this before when I was on here, but if we're going to discuss influencers, there was this issue of this Chinese influencer on Weibo, and she looked, perfect and glamorous. And then...
Oh, yeah, I know this one.
Her landlord, she wasn't, like, paying her rent, and she trashed the place, and the landlord took a bunch of pictures of her, like, apartment. There was, like, trash everywhere, and it looked like a pigsty, and he uploaded it. Yeah. And you see that comparison of what she actually lived in and this image that she represented. Yeah. And, yeah, there's also a really a subreddit called Instagramming Reality, and some of it is a little mean-spirited, which I don't like, but it really shows how people kind of alter their surroundings and their bodies to put up this kind of front.
Yep.
And it keeps you grounded. It's, I try not to look at influencers too much. I just mostly look at, like, memes and toy photography, but yeah, I mean, if you do have all of that in your feed and you're always looking, it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
And young kids don't even have that much experience behind them where they can kind of differentiate between the two.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, the interesting thing about influencers, I guess, is crap. Now I lost the thought.
Actually, I have something I want to say.
Sure.
So here's the thing. I think that a lot of things on the internet
Mm-hmm.
can be distracting,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or are not the best influences for you,
Mm-hmm.
right? But one thing that is interesting is that although we have a lot of bad things that came along with social media and in general, like the 24-hour news cycle and the fact that you have access instead of like what it used to be, where it was like from the morning until the evening is when you'd hear the news,
Mm-hmm.
and to now it's all the time. It's like negative, all that, blah blah.
Right.
Blah. Okay, but I think a lot of really good material became available as well.
Mm-hmm.
That I can't turn my head away from because there's a lot of things that I would not have learned
Mm-hmm.
if I didn't have access to the internet.
Yeah, most definitely.
And there were things that I found for free, like once upon a time, like books, like on topics that like they were never talking about in school.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was this thing.
Like Secrets of Bohemian Grove.
Close. Something called neuro-linguistic programming.
Okay.
Right. Different books on psychology in general. Things that I just wasn't exposed to.
Right.
That I kind of found.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I understand it's a very niche thing, and of course it's catered to my interests at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So not everyone's looking for that kind of stuff or something else that's good.
Mm-hmm.
But I would say that since we're still kind of early in our like getting used to this new way of doing things,
Mm-hmm.
I think there is going to come a time when we do get used to it and find some sort of equilibrium. But right now, it's definitely very chaotic.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have to be so on point and so focused about what influences or pages or memes or whatever that or shows that you're paying attention to in order to design how you want your life to be.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if you fall into the automaticity of everything,
Ooh,
it's
good word.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's so chaotic that the consequences of that are so like arbitrary that it feels bad that you can have like as a consequence negative effects on people's lives and just automatically because they're not as yet not everyone is making a conscious decision like okay, I'm going to use the internet for this much amount of time a day or I'm going to look at this kind of source as opposed to this or that.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
I think what you're doing, and you said that you're looking for information, you're using the internet and what it provides, you're using it as a tool instead of just mindlessly scrolling. And as long as you're mindful about using this as a tool, I think you'll be okay.
Yeah, so that one of the guests that we was talking about before from like 2 weeks ago, Meg Van Dusen, her book has to do with like being mindful about well, not just the internet, but just since we're talking about that, like using mindfulness when you're on social media or how often you use technology. And it kind of became apparent, like by the end of that conversation with her, that it's almost mandatory that mindfulness or some sort of level of focus or critical thinking needs to be taught. It's not even like just like some leisurely thing like hey guys, there's this thing called meditation, you know, all that. It almost feels like it's becoming really necessary with the amount of stimuli we have pulling at our attention. Unless you learn to focus and choose what it is that you're going to look at, even though even the amount of choice you have is still limited because we're still kind of like sponges in a way, and still do kind of act, you know, based off of our own, you know, internal reactions to things. Like we're not even if you get it down, like meditation, you're not going to be perfect at it.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's becoming mandatory to learn things like that. If not meditation, just some sort of form of focus. is.
Yeah, and I remember now what I wanted to say about the influencers. So, in terms of like most people, whatever, maybe not most, but a lot of people being jealous of them. I think that, and like, look, again, this is obviously really hard, obviously, because kind of we're seeing these people who kind of put themselves out there in such a way as to show that they're better than everybody else. I think we also have to understand, like, for the people who do know about what their lives are really like, is that a lot of these people are super lonely. A lot of them are perfectionists themselves, which is why they sort of curate their Instagrams the way they do. A lot of them don't really have kind of authentic relationships, the loneliness part. And so I think a lot of the times, or at least the hope is that somebody from the outside can kind of sort of, reach out to them and say like, hey, like you don't need to be this thing to gain attention or affection. Like you could just be yourself. And so sometimes influencers, when they are willing to be vulnerable to whatever extent, that's possible for them. Well, I mean, it is possible for them, but I guess to the whatever extent that they want to. So they pretty much are kind of honest and say so. Well, they say things. They sort of put their vulnerabilities out in like a positive way. So one thing I've seen is that like there was this really attractive influencer, and she wrote like, "I am like my own best friend," or "I am like my own soulmate," or something like that. And my thought was not like, "Oh wow, like she's this really great and confident person." It was like, "No, she must be incredibly lonely." Like that's her idea of like happiness, of being one's own soulmate. So I think when it comes to influencers that like for us, and don't get me wrong, I understand how hard this is because a lot of times for a lot of people perception is reality, and it's very easy to judge and hate them because they're sort of presenting an image of themselves that makes it appear that they're better than everybody else. But I would hope that somewhere along the lines that somebody can sort of say, look, you know what, I understand why you're doing this and you don't have to do it. You don't have to present a perfect picture of yourself because it's okay for you to be flawed, and we'd actually prefer that.
I really like that.
Thank you. So it would actually be better if we were to, wow. So it would be, this is my flaw. So, wow.
It's okay, I'm usually the call for
Yeah, no, I'm like.
This is a nice change of pace.
So yeah, my final thought on that is that if somebody sort of presents, or somebody's able to be vulnerable enough to say like, look, it really upsets me that pretty much I'm jealous of you, or that I feel like in some important ways you're better than me. I also sort of understand that you're suffering, and I want to sort of know you for who you actually are, and I want you to know that you don't have to be this person that you pretend to be.
Yeah, definitely.
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, and again, also some influencers are, some of them are actually not bad, I'll say. Mm-hmm. It's I hate to be that guy because your point is a salient point. You're pretty much saying like we're already making our point that we're trying to copy these people who are trying to look perfect.
Yes.
Right. Mm-hmm. That's the main point. Mm-hmm. But I do want to say not everyone's trying to be perfect. Some of them are good because they're authentic.
Yes.
And that's why they have so many people following them.
Yep.
It's just so many things are going on that it's out of hand, and it creates problems like what you just described.
Yeah. Have you guys ever seen the movie Can't Buy Me Love? It's like from 1987 with McDreamy.
No.
Okay.
I saw Love Don't Cost a Thing.
Wait, oh shit, that's actually that's actually the remake of Can't Buy Me Love.
Wow.
Did you know that?
Nope.
Oh, wow.
Magic.
Wow, that is synchronicity right there. So yeah, Love Don't Cost a Thing is actually the remake of Can't Buy Me Love. Wow. Okay, that's pretty cool. So actually the film is pretty much the same storyline, but obviously in a different time. So Can't Buy Me Love, so Amanda Peterson, like the girl who plays the love interest in the film, to me is like the most gorgeous girl I've ever seen, like ever. I was like, oh my god, I was like in love with her for ages. And so in the movie, like, so he's like this nerdy guy, right? Who like tries to win her over, pretty much Nick Cannon's character. So he's like, hey, how about we make a deal? You help me be popular, and pretty much I'll pay. I think he paid her for it, or like he gave her some sort of, I don't even remember what it was.
In the Love Don't Cost a Thing, he did.
He paid her, right? Yeah, so it was the same thing.
Yeah,
it was Can't Buy Me Love too, right? So he ended up paying her for it. I don't remember what she needed the money for, but she was like, whatever. So she made the deal with him. So in the film, as he gets to know her, and like she's this like wildly popular, attractive girl, he kind of gets to know her for who she is. And so she finally tells him somewhere in the movie, she's like, you like have no idea how hard popularity is. She's like, you kind of sit there from the outside and you judge me, thinking that my life is so much better than yours and that I look down on you and that's all I am. And then she's like, from my end of the spectrum, she's like, I don't really have anybody who knows me. I pretty much have to maintain a facade 24/7. I have to be entertaining. I have to be perfect, right? I have to sort of look a certain way. And then she's like, whenever I don't, I get harshly criticized for it because I'm always in the spotlight. So from her end, she's like, you have no idea how hard this is to like really only have sort of these shallow friendships that are pretty much based on status. And so he kind of got this, I guess, more in-depth picture or more genuine picture of who he was. And somewhere he was like, wow, like, holy shit, I had this really sort of, I guess, half-hearted perception of who you were. And I thought that was really cool because it pretty much we got to see that there's no such thing as like an influencer in the sense of like this perfect person who appears or who is the way that they appear. That even sort of popular people or even celebrities or whoever it is, like they also have their own struggles too. And a lot of the times the major struggle is that they can't be themselves. I think it was like Lady Gaga who recently posted a tweet where she said like fame is a prison. And that's pretty much what it is for a lot of these people. And Tupac talked about it for ages, right? Stuck in this game searching for fortune and fame, right? So it's like for them, they feel like all they are their images. And it's like they can't really... And Napoleon said that, right? He couldn't be himself.
Yeah. It's lonely being at the top.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and not being who you are at the top. Not being able to be authentic, being at the top.
And
yeah.
And that's yet another problem with perfectionism. The only people that'll see someone like a Lady Gaga for who she is is probably just a few people like in her friend circle that
her mom.
Her mom.
Like
for sure. Actually her mom for sure. Yeah.
Right, so then the question is, even if they're loved, right, by all of these different fans, like what are they loved for? What do they really know about them? So it's like they know their music, which is a lot of the times not that vulnerable, depending on obviously who the person is. And so, like, yeah, they like her pop tracks, but that's great. And so what's going to happen, like, when she passes away? Like, are people going to be like, oh, wow, no, I really loved Stephanie for, like, who she was and, like, all these great characteristics? Or they're just going to say, I really love that Lady Gaga song. Like, it really sort of affected me in some way.
Well, that's how she's going to make a mark, right? But people close to her will be the ones who... like that.
Most definitely.
I do think what's worth mentioning is that this, like, there is this trend that's been going on in TV for years, like with Breaking Bad and Mad Men and everything, where you have these flawed anti-heroes that, have a lot of issues they need to work on. And that kind of, because in the past, we'd always deal with a hero who is perfect and flawless, like Superman.
Yes.
But this trend of now all these leads and characters... Oh, like The Good Place? I love The Good Place.
Oh, yeah.
It's a great show. And I think we're all, because of this television trend, we're all kind of intrinsically yearning to root for somebody who has problems.
Yeah, and that reminds me of the episode that we had with Mark White. So, Liz, we had, so Mark White is like, so he's a philosophy professor who pretty much, he writes like, have you ever seen that series where it's like, it's called the Philosophy and Pop Culture series? So they write books like Black Mirror and philosophy.
Or Simpsons and philosophy.
Yeah, Simpsons and philosophy, Batman and ethics, etc.
So we had him on
That's
to talk
awesome.
about Batman and ethics.
Yeah, so he pretty much, he like loves superheroes. And so he told us that his favorite superhero was The Thing. And what he's like, what I love about The Thing is because like he was like this like ordinary, well, strong, very strong dude, but also a very ordinary dude who was obviously seemingly and like, kind of what's the word, prominently, like evidently flawed. And so the cool thing about him was that despite the fact that he was this incredibly flawed person, that he was able to overcome that and still become a good person. That for him it was more important to, let's say, be a good person and obviously do good things for the world than it was for him to, like, let's say, retaliate because people made fun of him and sort of, emotionally abused him.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I was like, wow, The Thing. What a character.
Yeah, so that's the thing, like, that's the thing. Yeah, for him, he had a fictional character, of course, but he had a purpose that was stronger than, the pettiness of, like, reacting to what people think of you and stuff. He found out what really mattered.
Yes. Which is incredibly hard. Whereas, like, for somebody like Superman, I mean, he was already perfect. So it's like, when you're already perfect, it's not that hard to be a good person.
And Superman technically wasn't... He was, in a way, but also, he was basically, everything about him was perfect, except internally.
Why?
He also had issues with his, like, emotions, for example, as far as that goes. So he actually was outwardly the strongest, most invincible character. And on many occasions, he is like the epitome of morals too. But there were times in like certain storylines where he'd struggle with either relationships or anger issues, or like he would help people. He noticed like things he was doing weren't helping people, were like still like really reactive and thinking like that what they're doing is not enough, like the heroes, and he'd get pissed off about that. He'd have issues with his family, like stuff. Yeah.
So normal stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. Wow.
Mhm.
All right, guys, are you about ready to wrap up?
Sure.
All right. So Liz, if let's say, what would your final thoughts be if we were to ask, like, what sort of ideas would you have for people who are struggling for perfectionism? What do you think would be the most helpful for them?
I would say start out small.
Mhm.
So instead of feeling that you have to reach this pinnacle, just remember that it's a journey. And if you only get a couple of things done or improve in a slight way, you did great. And give yourself time.
I love that.
And just the fact that nobody is perfect should be a very comforting thought. And you put a lot more pressure on yourself than other people would put pressure on you.
Love that. How about you?
Putting me on the spot. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I would definitely say that it's important to if for example, in the case of if you think that you need to have certain conditions to be perfect before you can take action, like in my case, right, where I needed to have enough knowledge, I needed to have need to speak a certain way or something along those lines. If you're you can't let something like that stop you. You need to, and I like what Liz said with like start small. You need to move in the direction of what it is that you really want to do, and don't let perfectionism stop you. Even if you can't accomplish, even if you don't even know what to do, start out small. Try to. Oh, this is great. So here's the thing: a lot of people won't act on something unless they're it's in line with their, like, they feel passionate about it. There's a big thing they go, I'm going to be quick about it, this could be a conversation for next time. But there's this thing where that's going around where everyone should do something they're passionate about. Like the whole 9 to 5 workday thing. There's this narrative that's being pushed out, like you should do what you love, right? And I'm in full agreement with that. I will not disagree with that, right? However, because of that, somebody can take that kind of a message, misinterpret it, and then think, well, until I feel really, really passionate, I won't then do this thing, because you need to be this level of passion to do it. And I would say, counterintuitively, that's not the case. Take action in a certain direction, even if you don't know what you want to do. Then say say it's like say there's even a beaten path. I like the idea of taking the unbeaten path. I highly even recommend that. However, if you don't have something that you want to do that's like unique, or you don't know what you want to do, even just take action along a beaten path till you can. Don't be stalled in indecisiveness and thinking like things need to be perfect and you need to wait till this happens or that happens, because that can cause like cascading effects on your life. And if you act now or as quickly as you can, build some sort of momentum, you will not waste any time like I did, for example.
And to jump off of that, I would also say to be careful with black and white thinking. That it's never as simple that if you're one thing, therefore you're supposed to achieve something else. Or rather, if somebody has a particular quality or a particular feeling, therefore something is going to result from it. So don't think of yourself as, or don't think of another person as truly loving you, meaning that they're going to automatically want to date you, or they're automatically going to want to marry you, or be with you, etc. And also try your best not to think of yourself as, let's say, if I were really smart, therefore I should be able to achieve or have all of these sort of, or have all of this success kind of quickly. That everything comes with time no matter how smart you are. And I think an example that we used before, and this probably was a while ago, was with the inventor Nathan Beerhold. So Nathan Beerhold is like one of Bill Gates' like best friends, and he's like, so Bill Gates is like, he's like the smartest person I've ever met, pure genius. And so what this guy said was that he's like, you guys like don't kind of really know what my life is like. He's like, when I actually like go into different fields and I try to learn different things, he's like, sometimes I really feel stupid because I'm confused, I don't understand things. So there are times where like it takes me like forever to grasp something. So he's like, as an inventor, in order order to be good at what I do, I have to be okay with making those mistakes and be okay with sort of falling a few times before I kind of get back up and become successful at whatever it is I'm doing. So for us as human beings, we have to really accept that there's not a one-to-one correlation between particular qualities and particular outcomes. That somebody could be sort of in love with you and not want to date you. Somebody could be really smart and not necessarily grasp a complex idea or complex ideas quickly. And the point is that it's okay because like we're human beings and we can still have all of these qualities and not be able to achieve certain things that we want. That it's not black and white. Again, you could be in love and you could not want to be with somebody. You could be really smart and you could not get something. And all of that isn't exactly an indicator of who you are. We have to kind of look at the bigger picture a lot of the times, which people kind of find it hard to do, obviously. Because for us, we're kind of immediate in our responses, that we see sort of a cause or a potential cause, and we're like, okay, here's the outcome, therefore this was the only cause. So it's like this person rejected me, therefore that means that automatically he or she doesn't love me. We're not sort of seeing the bigger picture of what the relationship is like. So I guess that's sort of my biggest, I hope this is the biggest takeaway, that black and white thinking is bad, and sort of try as best as you can to see the bigger picture and to see the nuance in whatever scenario you find yourself in.
Wonderful.
Thank you. I think all you guys did a great job. I'm really happy with this episode.
Same here.
All right, Liz. We will see you soon.
Yeah, see you soon.
See you soon.
All right.
And to everyone at home, first I gotta say, that was pretty good. That was a nice episode. You see this new equipment we have here? We tried to do it with Keith last time, but it didn't quite work out, but happy it worked out this time.
We're legit now.
That's right. So you can look forward to the next episode, episode 33. We'll do it next week. We're going to have Kirk Schneider
on. This is going to be
the
fantastic.
great and powerful Kirk Schneider.
The wizard.
To borrow from Rogan, And follow us at Seize the Moment Podcast on Facebook and Instagram, and at Seize_podcast on Twitter. Like and subscribe.
Hit the bell.
Hit the bell. See you guys next time.
See ya.